I'm Rachel Miller, 28, female. I live in a modest one-bedroom apartment in a city that always felt just a little too expensive for me. As a landscape architect, I create beautiful, serene spaces for others. Ironic, considering my own life was a constant hustle of balancing rent, student loans, and the dream of one day designing a park that people would remember. My life wasn't bad, but it was a careful, calculated existence, planned down to the last dollar. And then, on a Tuesday that felt like any other, a slip of paper worth $50 million landed in my hands and threatened to burn that calculated life to the ground. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. The day it happened was aggressively ordinary. It was a Tuesday in April, the kind of day where the sky can't decide between sun and rain, so it offers a bland gray compromise. I was on my lunch break, grabbing a sandwich from a corner deli I'd been going to for years. The owner, a kind man named Mr. Chen, always had a smile. On my way out, something made me stop. The lottery jackpot was flashing on a small screen above the counter, a staggering $50 million. I never played. It always felt like a tax on people who were bad at math, a fantasy I couldn't afford to indulge in. But that day, for a reason I will never understand, I bought a single ticket. I let the machine pick the numbers, stuffed the ticket into my wallet next to expired coupons, and forgot about it. Life continued its predictable rhythm. My job at a mid-sized architecture firm was demanding. I loved the creative aspect, sketching out green rooftops and community gardens, but the pay was just enough to keep my head above water. My social life revolved mostly around my best friend, Sarah. We had known each other since college, and she was the yin to my yang. While I was quiet and content with simple things, Sarah was ambitious, a marketing manager who lived for brunch cocktails, designer labels, and networking events. She was always pushing me to level up, to demand a higher salary, to date wealthier men. I knew she meant well, but sometimes it felt like she was trying to renovate my life as if it were an outdated kitchen. Then there was my older brother, Mark. At 31, he was still chasing his dream of becoming a rock star. I admired his passion, but his passion didn't pay his bills. He was perpetually between gigs, which was a creative way of saying he was unemployed. Our parents had passed away a few years prior, leaving us with a small inheritance that he had burned through in less than a year on new guitars and studio time. I loved him, but our phone calls always ended with him asking for a small loan to tide him over. A week after buying the ticket, I was decluttering my wallet when it fluttered out. Curiosity got the better of me. I pulled up the lottery website, my heart thumping in a slow, steady rhythm of disbelief as I matched the first number, then the second. By the fourth number, I was sitting on the floor of my apartment, my hands shaking. The fifth, the sixth, the final Powerball number. They all matched. It wasn't real. It couldn't be. I must have been reading it wrong. I checked 3 different websites, then the official app. The result was the same. A single winning ticket sold at a corner deli in my neighborhood. My ticket, $50 million. The first emotion wasn't joy. It was a cold, paralyzing wave of terror. This amount of money was not a solution. It was a problem on a scale I couldn't comprehend. It was a force that could change everything, and not necessarily for the better. I thought of Sarah, whose eyes already lit up when talking about multi-million-dollar condos she marketed. I thought of Mark, who would see me as his personal, infinite ATM. I thought of distant relatives I hadn't heard from in years suddenly wanting to reconnect. The money felt like a target painted on my back. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the dark, the winning ticket on my coffee table, and I made a decision. I would claim the money, of course. I would hire lawyers and financial advisors, the whole anonymous LLC setup you read about online. But to the world, to my friends and my family, nothing would change. I would keep my job, my apartment, my life. I was going to pretend to be the same old Rachel Miller, struggling to make ends meet. It started as a way to protect myself, to get my bearings, but a darker, more curious thought crept in. What if it was also a test to see who the people in my life really were when they thought I had nothing to offer? Claiming the prize was a surreal, covert operation. Following the advice I'd found in countless articles about lottery winners, I hired a reputable lawyer and a financial planner before I even signed the back of the ticket. We set up a blind trust, so my name would never be publicly associated with the win. The money, after I opted for the lump sum and paid the mountain of taxes, was still a life-shattering amount. It sat in a newly opened bank account, a number on a screen that felt completely disconnected from my reality. I transferred a small, believable inheritance of about $30,000 from a supposed distant relative into my regular checking account, just to have a plausible reason for any minor lifestyle improvements I might make down the line. To everyone else, I was still the same Rachel. The first few weeks were an exercise in paranoia. Every phone call made me jump. Every time Sarah suggested a restaurant that was slightly too expensive, I would flinch, thinking, does she know? I rehearsed my lines, practicing the familiar sighs about rent increases and the cost of groceries. It was exhausting, like playing a character in a play where I was the only cast member and the only audience. My secret was a heavy weight, and I could feel it creating a chasm between me and the people I was closest to. Sarah was the first to test my resolve. We were out for our weekly coffee, and she was scrolling through her phone, showing me pictures from a lavish weekend getaway her company had sponsored. "You should come next time, Ratch," she said, not looking up from her screen. "I know it's a bit pricey, but you have to live a little. Maybe you should just get a credit card and worry about it later." I gave her my practiced weary smile. "You know I can't do that, Sarah. I'm trying to be responsible." "Responsible is boring," she scoffed, finally looking at me. Her eyes scanned my outfit, a simple sweater and jeans I'd owned for years. "Seriously, you work so hard. Don't you ever want more? A nicer apartment, a car that doesn't make that weird rattling noise?" Every word was a small jab. In the past, I would have agreed with her, lamented my financial situation, but now her words sounded different. They weren't coming from a place of concern, they sounded like judgment. It was as if my financial status was a personal failing that reflected poorly on her. I felt a defensive anger rise in me, but I pushed it down. One day, I said quietly, "I'm working on it." The conversations with my brother Mark were even more draining. He called me a week after the money was secured in my trust. His voice had that familiar wheedling tone that always preceded a request. He talked for 20 minutes about his new vision. For his band, a concept album that was going to be his big break. Then came the pivot. "The thing is, Ratch," he began, his voice dropping conspiratorially, "I need some new equipment to really nail this sound, and studio time isn't cheap. I was thinking maybe you could help me out, just a couple $1,000. I'll pay you back as soon as the album takes off, I swear." This was my chance to set a new precedent. "Mark, I can't," I said, my voice firm. "I just had to pay for a big car repair, and things are really tight this month. I'm sorry." The silence on the other end of the line was cold. "Tight," he repeated, his voice laced with disbelief. "You're always tight, Rachel. You have a stable job. What do you even spend your money on? You never do anything fun. It's like you're hoarding it." The accusation stung, mostly because of its wild inaccuracy. He had no idea. "I have student loans, Mark. I have rent. It's called being an adult. Yeah, well, some of us are trying to create art instead of just designing flower beds for rich people." He snapped before hanging up. I sat there, phone in hand, feeling strangely hollow. The secret wasn't just a burden, it was an insulator. It was wrapping me in a layer of solitude, protecting me, but also preventing any real warmth from getting through. Every conversation felt like a lie, every interaction a performance, and I was beginning to wonder how long I could keep the show going before I forgot who I was when the curtain came down. To make my financial struggle more convincing, I decided to introduce a new plot point. A couple of months after the win, I told my inner circle that my firm had lost a major client and that as a result they were cutting everyone's hours. I wasn't fired, I explained, but my paycheck was going to be significantly smaller for the foreseeable future. I framed it as a devastating blow, a step back on my already precarious financial ladder. The reactions were illuminating. Sarah was the first person I told. I met her for a drink after work, making sure to pick a cheap dive bar instead of our usual spot. I laid out the story, injecting my voice with the right amount of panic and despair. Her initial reaction was a picture of sympathy. She put her hand on mine, her brow furrowed. "Oh, Ratch, that's awful. I'm so sorry." But the sympathy was fleeting. It quickly morphed into a string of "I told you so's" disguised as advice. "You see, this is what I've been telling you," she said, stirring her expensive cocktail. "You need to be more aggressive. You should have been looking for other jobs months ago. That firm was never going to appreciate you. You're too loyal." Over the next few weeks, I noticed a distinct shift in our friendship. The invitations to brunch at trendy, expensive places slowed to a trickle and then stopped altogether. When I suggested we do something free, like a walk in the park or a movie night at my apartment, she was always busy. One Friday night, I was scrolling through social media and saw a picture of her with a group of our mutual acquaintances, all raising glasses at a rooftop bar I had mentioned wanting to go to. I hadn't been invited. The caption read, "Friday night with my favorite people." The message was clear. In Sarah's world, which was built on networking and appearances, I had become a liability. My financial instability was a social dead end. A conversation with her a week later confirmed it. She was talking about a mutual friend's upcoming destination wedding in Mexico. "You're probably not going to be able to go now, with your whole work situation, right?" she asked, not as a question, but as a statement of fact. "I don't know," I said, testing her. "I might be able to swing it if I'm careful." She gave me a pitiful look. "Ratch, be realistic. It's going to be like $2,000 when all is said and done. You should probably just save your money. We'll have a drink to celebrate with you when we get back." She said we, not I. I had been officially demoted from her inner circle. Mark's reaction was even more transparent, though less surprising. When I told him about my reduced hours, his first question wasn't, "Are you okay?" It was, "So does that mean you can't help me out with that loan for a while?" I told him that was correct, and that in fact I might need to cut back on my own expenses. The change in his demeanor was instantaneous. The supportive, brotherly facade vanished, replaced by a bitter, resentful stranger. Our calls became shorter, filled with his passive-aggressive comments about my lack of ambition and how I was stuck in a rut. He accused me of being selfish for not having a better financial safety net that he could benefit from. "I guess I'll have to figure things out on my own, then," he'd say with a dramatic sigh, as if he hadn't been doing that his entire adult life. He stopped asking about my well-being entirely. My only function in his life had been as a potential source of funds, and now that the source had dried up, I was no longer of any use to him. The cracks weren't just showing, they were turning into seismic fissures, revealing a landscape of my relationships that I no longer recognized. The loneliness was profound. I was sitting on a fortune that could solve any material problem, but I had never felt poorer. The money hadn't changed me, but it was acting as a powerful catalyst, accelerating the decay in relationships that, I was beginning to realize, had been rotting from the inside for a very long time. While my personal relationships were crumbling, my professional life became my sanctuary. The lie about my reduced hours didn't impact my actual work, of course. I still showed up every day and threw myself into my projects, finding a strange comfort in the familiar routines of drafting plans and meeting deadlines. It was at the office, in the midst of my self-imposed social exile, that something unexpected happened. David, a senior landscape architect at my firm, was a man of few words. At 55, he had a quiet, steady presence that I had always found calming. He was a master of his craft, but he was unassuming, preferring to let his work speak for itself. We were friendly in a typical colleague sort of way, exchanging pleasantries by the coffee machine and occasionally collaborating on projects. He wasn't someone I would have considered a close friend. About a month into my financial hardship, David approached my desk as I was packing up for the day. He was holding 2 folders. "Miller," he said, his voice gentle. "Got a minute?" I nodded, assuming he wanted to discuss the community park project we were working on. Instead, he pulled up a chair. I heard about the hour reductions. He started, looking at me with genuine concern. "That's tough. I went through something similar at my old firm back in the '08 recession. It's rough." I gave him a weak smile, readying my rehearsed lines about tightening my belt and weathering the storm. But he didn't offer platitudes or unsolicited advice. He just listened. After I finished my little speech, he slid one of the folders across my desk. "Look, I know it's none of my business," he said. "Look, I know it's none of my business," he said a little awkwardly, "but I have some contacts at a few other firms, good people. I took the liberty of updating your portfolio with some of our recent work. If you wanted to quietly put out some feelers, no one here would have to know." I was stunned into silence. He had spent his own time preparing my portfolio to help me find a new job, an act that could have gotten him in trouble if our boss found out. He wasn't judging me or telling me what I should have done differently. He was just helping. "David, I don't know what to say, thank you." A few days later, he noticed me skipping lunch to work at my desk. I had been doing it to avoid awkward questions from colleagues about my finances. He appeared at my elbow around noon with 2 brown paper bags. "Come on," he said with a nod toward the door. "It's a nice day. Let's eat in the park." We sat on a bench in a small public garden a few blocks from the office. He'd bought us sandwiches from a little Italian deli. We didn't talk about my work situation. Instead, he asked me about my design philosophy. He told me stories about his first job, the mistakes he made, the lessons he learned. For the first time in months, I had a conversation that didn't feel like a performance. I wasn't poor Rachel or secretly rich Rachel. I was just Rachel, a landscape architect talking to a colleague she respected. As we were walking back, he did something that floored me. "Rachel," he said, stopping on the sidewalk. "I hope you don't take this the wrong way. My wife and I were comfortable. Our kids are grown and out of the house. If you run into any trouble with rent or anything, I want you to let me know. We could float you a small loan, no interest, pay it back whenever you can. Just don't let some stupid corporate decision put you in a bad spot." Tears pricked my eyes. This man, who barely knew me, was offering me more genuine support and kindness than my best friend of 10 years or my own brother. He saw a person in need, and his first instinct was to offer a hand, with no strings attached, no judgment, no lecture. It was a pure, simple act of human decency. It was in that moment, standing on a busy city street, that the purpose of my strange experiment became crystal clear. The money hadn't just shown me the ugly side of the people I thought I loved. It had also illuminated the quiet, unassuming goodness in people I had barely noticed. David's kindness was a lighthouse in my lonely, self-created storm. It showed me that real wealth had absolutely nothing to do with the number in my bank account. David's selfless offer was a turning point. It was like a splash of cold, clean water to the face, waking me up from the cynical haze I'd been living in. The bitterness I felt towards Sarah and Mark began to dissolve, replaced by a sense of clarity and resolve. My experiment had run its course. I had the answers I needed, as painful as some of them were. Now it was time to end the charade, but I couldn't just go back to normal. A line had to be drawn, not for revenge, but for my own self-respect. The plan wasn't elaborate or cruel. It was simple. I needed one final, undeniable confirmation of their character before I closed this chapter of my life for good. I decided to make myself truly vulnerable, or at least appear to be. I would ask them both for help, not a vague, future tense kind of help, but a specific, immediate, and modest request for a loan. I wanted to see what they would do when I was, in their eyes, at my absolute lowest. First, I called Sarah. I pitched my voice to sound like I was on the verge of tears. "Sarah, something terrible has happened." I whispered into the phone. "My landlord is raising the rent, and with my hours cut, I did the math, and I'm going to be about $500 short this month. I'm panicking. I know this is a huge ask, but could you possibly lend me the money? I'll pay you back in installments as soon as I can." There was a long pause on the other end. "Oh, Ratch," she finally said, her voice dripping with a rehearsed, insincere pity. "That's just awful. I feel for you, I really do." Another pause. "But honestly, my own finances are a complete mess right now. I just booked that trip to Bali, and I had to put a huge deposit down, and I'm trying to save up for a down payment on a condo. Every penny is accounted for. I literally can't spare it." I knew for a fact she had just received a large bonus at work. She had bragged about it on social media just last week. "Oh," I said, my voice small, "okay, I understand. Have you thought about getting a roommate?" She suggested, her tone shifting to a brisk, problem-solving mode that was completely devoid of empathy. "Or maybe you could pick up some waitressing shifts on the weekend. You just have to be a bit more proactive. You can't expect things to just fall into your lap." The condescension was staggering. I was at my rock bottom, and her response was to lecture me about being proactive. "Thanks for the advice, Sarah," I said, my voice flat. "I'll figure something out." And next, I called Mark. His reaction was even more predictable. When I asked him for a loan of just $200 to cover my utility bills, he actually laughed. "You're asking me for money. Ratch, have you met me? I'm the struggling artist, remember. You're the one with the respectable, boring job." "My hours were cut, Mark, I told you." I reminded him, my patience wearing thin. Yeah, so you've said. Look, I can't help you. I'm barely scraping by as it is. Maybe if you'd been more supportive of my career in the past, I'd be in a position to help you now." He somehow managed to turn my request for help into a referendum on my failings as a sister. It was a masterclass in emotional manipulation. "Right," I said, a strange sense of calm washing over me. "I understand. Thanks anyway." I hung up the phone. There was no anger, no sadness, just a quiet, resolute finality. They had been given one last chance to show a sliver of compassion, to act like a friend and a brother. They had failed the test in the most spectacular fashion. They had shown me, in no uncertain terms, exactly who they were. The line in the sand had been drawn, not by me, but by them. All that was left was for me to step over it and walk away. I sent them both a text message asking them to meet me for dinner the following evening at a restaurant called Area. I told them I had some news to share. They both agreed, likely out of a morbid curiosity to see what new disaster had befallen me. They had no idea they were walking into the final scene of a play they didn't even know they were starring in. Area was one of the most exclusive restaurants in the city. It was the kind of place Sarah constantly named, dropped but had never actually been to, where a single entree cost more than my weekly grocery budget used to. I booked a private dining room. When I arrived, I was calm. The anxiety that had been my constant companion for months was gone, replaced by a steely sense of purpose. Sarah arrived first, her eyes wide as she took in the opulent decor. "Rachel." "What is this? I thought you were broke. Did you win a gift card or something?" she asked, a hint of suspicion in her voice. "Something like that." I said with a small smile, "Have a seat." Mark shuffled in a few minutes later, looking uncomfortable in his best t-shirt. "Okay, what's going on?" He demanded. "This place is insane. Did you get a new job? Please just sit down," I said, gesturing to the plush chairs. Once they were settled, I didn't waste any time. "I asked you both here tonight because I need to be honest with you. The last few months have been a lie. My hours weren't cut at work. I haven't been struggling with money." They exchanged a confused look. "What are you talking about?" Sarah asked, her brow furrowed. "You called me yesterday, crying about your rent." "I know. I said, and I asked you for $500. You told me you couldn't spare it because you were saving for a down payment and a trip to Bali. I then turned to Mark, and I asked you for $200 for my utility bills. You laughed at me and said I should have been more supportive of your music career." Their faces began to register a dawning sense of unease. They knew they had been caught in a lie, but they didn't understand the context yet. "The truth," I said, leaning forward and placing my hands on the table, "is that about 6 months ago I won the lottery. I let the words hang in the air, $50 million. The silence in the room was absolute. It was so quiet I could hear the faint clinking of cutlery from the main dining hall. Sarah's jaw literally dropped. Her perfectly applied makeup couldn't hide the ugly mix of shock, disbelief, and raw, naked greed that flashed across her face. Mark just stared at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. 50 million. Sarah finally choked out, her voice a strangled whisper. "That's right," I said calmly. "After taxes, the lump sum was just over 28 million to be precise." The dam of their composure broke. "Oh my God, Rachel!" "That's amazing," Sarah shrieked, her voice suddenly saccharine sweet. She lunged across the table to grab my hands. "Why didn't you tell me? We're best friends. I was just trying to teach you to be responsible with that loan thing." It was tough love. Mark was no better. "Ratch, sis, that's incredible," he said, his eyes gleaming. "We're rich. I knew you had it in you. That whole thing yesterday, I was just joking, obviously. A brother's gotta tease his little sister, you know." Their pathetic, transparent backpedaling was almost pitiful to watch. I pulled my hands away from Sarah's grasp. "No," I said, my voice cold and clear. "Stop. Just stop it, both of you. Do you hear yourselves? The only thing that has changed in the last 5 minutes is that you now think I have money. But I am the same person I was yesterday when you both decided I wasn't worth a few $100s of your time or compassion." I looked directly at Sarah, my best friend, who ditched me the second she thought I couldn't afford her lifestyle, who lectured me on being proactive when I pretended to be at my lowest point. Then I looked at my brother, and you, my own brother, who has treated me like a bank account your entire adult life. The moment I couldn't be one, you accused me of being selfish and unsupportive. The truth, delivered without anger, just facts, silenced them. Their fake smiles faltered. "I didn't do this to be cruel." I continued. "I did it because I had to know the truth. And you showed me, when you thought I had nothing, you showed me exactly what your friendship and your love are worth, and it turns out the answer is nothing." I stood up, placing a platinum credit card on the table. "Dinner is on me. It's the last thing you will ever get from me. The trust, the friendship, the family connection. That's all gone." "You broke it, not me." I turned and walked out of the private room, leaving them sitting in a stunned, guilty silence at a table laden with food they could never afford, paid for by a woman they had completely misjudged. I didn't look back. Walking out of that restaurant felt like shedding a skin. I had been trapped in for years. The air outside, cool and crisp, had never felt so clean. For the first time in 6 months, I was no longer playing a part. I was just Rachel, and for the first time in a long time, I felt truly, completely free. The days that followed were quiet. As expected, my phone was bombarded with a flurry of desperate texts and voicemails from Sarah and Mark. They swung wildly from angry accusations to pathetic apologies, full of promises of how they would change. I didn't respond to a single one. I blocked their numbers and all of their social media profiles. It wasn't an act of anger, but of preservation. I was pruning the dead branches from my life so that something new could grow. A week later, I walked into my office and handed in my resignation. My boss was shocked but supportive. The last person I spoke to was David. I asked him to join me for coffee. We sat at a small cafe, and I told him everything. I told him about the lottery, the lie, the test, and the final dinner. He listened patiently, his expression unreadable. When I finished, he just shook his head slowly. "I'm not surprised," he said quietly. "Money doesn't change people." "Rachel, it just makes them more of who they already are." He looked at me, a kind smile on his face. "But I'm sorry you had to go through that to find out. It was worth it." I told him. It showed me what's real. I slid an envelope across the table. "This is for you," I said. He opened it cautiously. Inside was a cashier's check for $250,000. He stared at it, speechless. "Rachel, I can't accept this." "Yes, you can." I insisted. "You told me your wife has always dreamed of opening her own bakery. This is the seed money. You offered me help when you thought I had nothing, with no expectation of getting anything in return. You showed me what true generosity looks like. Please, let me show you my gratitude." Tears welled in his eyes. He eventually accepted, not as a handout, but as a gift from a friend. That, I realized, was what I wanted my money to be, a tool for creating joy and opportunity for good people. In the year that followed, my life transformed. I started the Miller Foundation, a nonprofit that designs and builds beautiful public parks and community gardens in underserved neighborhoods. The kind of work I had always dreamed of doing, but on a scale I never imagined. I traveled the world not to stay in fancy resorts, but to study gardens, designs in Kyoto, urban parks in Copenhagen, and sustainable landscapes in Costa Rica. I finally felt like I was living a life that was authentic to me. I never heard from Sarah or Mark again, though I sometimes heard whispers through the grapevine. Sarah's obsession with status eventually led her into deep credit card debt. Mark was still playing in dive bars, still talking about the big break that was just around the corner. Their lives hadn't changed because they hadn't. Sometimes I think about that lottery ticket. It didn't buy me happiness, but it bought me clarity. It peeled back layers of my life and showed me the truth of the foundations underneath. It took away a brother and a best friend, but it gave me a true friend in David, and more importantly, it gave me back to myself. I am no longer Rachel, the woman who struggles. I am Rachel, the woman who builds gardens, and for the first time, my own life feels as beautiful and as full of potential as the spaces I create.